I was getting old, though they didn't know it. I could feel it in my bones, the weight of my years pressing down on me. Yet to the people, I was still the mighty king, Ikena Ikenga. They didn't see the slow decline, the way my thoughts sometimes faltered, how my hands shook ever so slightly when I gripped the royal scepter. They believed I would rule forever. But they were wrong. The time had come to choose a successor, but it wasn't an easy decision. For years, I had been guiding my kingdom, watching it grow and prosper, always thinking ahead. But now there was a burning question. Who would carry the mantle when I was gone? I had two sons, Chijioke and Obina. Obina was my flesh and blood, the one who shared the same bloodline as me, yet in his heart there was darkness. He was cruel, impatient, selfish, everything a king should not be. On the other hand, Chijioke, my adopted son, had the qualities of a true leader. His heart was kind, his mind sharp, and he understood the people. He had the Ikenga spirit, but not the Ikenga blood. The people, no, the elders, believed that only a true son of Ikenga should sit on the throne. Their words echoed in my ears every time I considered Chijioke. Let no adopted son sit on our throne. But I had made my decision. Chijioke was the one who would lead us into the future. He had the heart of a king. And yet, how could I break tradition, defy the very law that held our kingdom together? It wasn't a simple choice. It was a battle between duty and heart, but I had already chosen, even if the rest of the world didn't understand. The days grew heavier, the air thick with whispers. I could hear the elders' voices whenever I closed my eyes, their words relentless like an unbroken drumbeat. Let no adopted son sit on our throne, they said, their faces grim, their words sharp. They were the pillars of this kingdom, the ones who upheld the ancient traditions, and they believed only the blood of Ikenga should flow through the throne. I could hear them clearly when I sat with them in the royal council hall, their eyes looking past me as though I had already become a shadow. They spoke of bloodlines, of legacy, of honor, and of all the things that mattered to them, but I wasn't blind to what was in front of me. Obina. My own flesh and blood was a disaster. His arrogance was as wide as the kingdom, and his cruelty was poison to our people. He would never be the king the people needed. My adopted son, on the other hand, was different. His heart was noble, his soul kind. He understood the people's pain, their struggles, and he wanted nothing more than to see them flourish. But there was a problem. He wasn't of Ikenga blood. And that was enough to make the villagers, the elders, and even some of the chiefs scream in outrage. I sat in my chambers one evening, a heavy weight on my chest, the decision tormenting me. My wife, Queen Olaama, came in, her face full of concern. She knew the choice was tearing me apart. She too had seen what I saw. Chijek was the better man, the better leader. But I couldn't bring myself to act against tradition. Do what you must, she whispered softly, for the good of our people. But how could I? How could I betray everything that had built this kingdom? How could I break the traditions that made us who we were? I sat in my chambers that evening, the weight of what I was about to say almost choking me. Chijioke had come into my room, his eyes filled with confusion, but also anger that I could feel crawling across the room. It was time to speak the truth. But could I truly explain myself? Could I justify the decision I had already made? Father, you've called me here for something. What is it? His voice was steady, but his clenched fists betrayed him. He was not prepared for what was about to come. I could barely look at him, but I had no choice. I've decided to name Obina the Crown Prince, I said slowly, my voice almost trembling. It felt like the walls were closing in on me. He froze, the silence between us deafening. Obina, he whispered the name, and I could see the disbelief in his eyes. But I am the eldest father. I should be next in line. I've been by your side all these years, fighting for this kingdom. Why would you choose him over me? His voice rose with every word, now thick with pain and frustration. He is wicked. He is cruel. You know what he's like, and still, you choose him? I stood up and walked toward the window, my back to him, afraid of facing the hurt in his eyes. The people have spoken. The elders, the chiefs, they believe that the throne must remain in the hands of the true Ikenga bloodline. They will never accept someone without that blood running through his veins. But I am Ikenga, Chijioke spat, stepping forward. I've carried your name with pride. I've fought for this kingdom. Why does that not matter? Why is blood more important than heart? I clenched my fists tightly, because it is not just about the blood. It's about tradition, Chijioke. I am the one who has to carry the weight of what the people demand. He glared at me, his voice barely a whisper. You're making a mistake, father, and I will never understand why you would do this. I swallowed hard, my words coming out like rocks. I have made my decision. The law is the law. I will make Obinna the crowned prince, and I will leave him in charge of all the kingdom's affairs. I will be the figurehead king, and my power will only be in name. He has the right to rule as he sees fit, but only I can take that power back from him if needed. His eyes widened with shock and anger. What do you mean? You'll just sit there while he destroys everything? You'll let him do as he pleases? I said nothing, staring at the ground. Go, Chijioke. Go now. Leave the kingdom, for your own safety. You are not safe here anymore. He turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. At that moment, I knew I had broken something in him, something that would not be fixed until much later. What he did not know, what he could not understand yet, was that the law I had created was never just about Obinna ruling. It was about the kingdom's survival. I had to let the people see what the consequences of their demands were. And one day, Chijioke would see it too. But the next day, the chief priest arrived. The elders, desperate for their own agenda, had pressured him to speak. They wanted him to validate their position, this belief that Obinna must rule because of the bloodline. He arrived, calm and solemn, his face a mask of neutrality. The priest's words echoed in the hall. The king knows what he must do. He is wise, and he will not let foolishness prevail. What they did not understand was that the chief priest's words were not an endorsement. He was simply reminding me of my duty. But the people, the chiefs and the elders, misread his words. They took them as approval for their wishes, believing he was urging me to follow their path. I had no choice but to comply with their wishes and choose Obinna, to place the crown in his hands and force Chijioke to leave. But even as I did so, I knew I was not abandoning Chijioke. I was preparing him for something far greater. Days passed, and I sat in the palace powerless. The law had been set. Obinna was the crown prince, and the kingdom would have to face the consequences of that decision. I had given him everything, the power, the law, the freedom to rule as he saw fit. It was a painful choice, one that twisted in my gut every day I watched the kingdom suffer under his rule. Chijioke had left, as I had told him to. His heart was heavy, and mine was no less burdened. I could hear the whispers of the people as I walked through the palace halls. They had begun to regret their demands. They had begun to feel the weight of Obinna's cruelty. It wasn't long before I received word of what was happening across the kingdom. Obinna had started taxing the people mercilessly. He demanded more from them, even when they had nothing left to give. The farmers worked harder, the merchants cried out, and the children went hungry. It was not long before the streets ran red with the blood of those who dared to defy him. The worst part, he showed no mercy. He punished those who failed to pay taxes with cruel and unforgiving hands. He would have people flogged in public, sometimes even killing them for the smallest offense. His temper was as sharp as a knife, and his anger burned through the kingdom like wildfire. Chijioke, the son who had always shown kindness, who had a heart full of wisdom, was nowhere to be found. The chiefs who had supported him now found themselves suffering as well. Obinna spared no one, not even those who had fought for his throne. The very people who had believed he was the right choice found themselves trapped in the web of his cruelty. Even Queen Olama, my wife, was not spared. She had tried to speak to him, to reason with her son, but Obinna would have none of it. He had her imprisoned, throwing her in the dungeon for daring to question his rule. I watched as the kingdom, my kingdom, began to tear itself apart, and yet I could do nothing. I was a king in name only, my power stripped away. The law I had made, the one that had placed Obinna in power, was now a cage I could not escape. I had hoped deep down that he would change, that he would be the king I had dreamed of when I first named him the crowned prince. But it was clear now that he would never be the ruler I had hoped for. The people began to plead with me. They begged me to take back the power, to reverse the law, to end the madness. The chiefs, once so sure of their decision, were now frightened by the chaos that had gripped the kingdom. They had been too quick to listen to their own desires, too blind to see that they were condemning themselves to a reign of terror. But there was only one thing left for me to do. I called for the chief priest to come to the palace once more. It was time to make the hardest decision of my life. Obinna had to be stopped. The decision had been made. The people had begged, and I could not ignore their cries any longer. I had watched in silence as my kingdom crumbled under the heavy rule of my son Obinna, and now the moment of reckoning had arrived. As the days passed, I could feel the weight of my earlier decisions lifting from my chest. I had raised Chijioke, my adopted son, as my own, and though he did not share my blood, he had the heart of an Ikenga. It was time for the people to see that. I sent for Chijioke, and he entered the throne room, his face still filled with the anger and confusion I knew all too well. His heart was broken. He had trusted me, yet I had pushed him away for reasons he could not understand. But today, I hoped he would see. As he stood before me, he did not speak. He only stared at me, waiting for an explanation, still hurt by the actions I had taken. Before I could speak, the chiefs, the very men who had pushed me into naming Obinna the crowned prince, entered the room. They were waiting for me to speak, to confirm that I had finally done the right thing. I stood and looked at them, then at my son. The room was filled with tension. Chi began, my voice firm. I know your heart is heavy with anger. You feel betrayed, but I did this to show the people that kingship is not just a matter of blood, but of the heart. The people needed to learn that an Ikenga is not just someone who shares blood with me, but one who bears the name and the spirit of our kingdom. You have always been an Ikenga in heart. You, my son, are the true heir to the throne. The chiefs were silent, watching carefully. Chijioke stood still, processing my words. I continued, my voice growing more resolute. I named Obinna as the crowned prince because I needed the people to understand this lesson. Kingship is not always determined by blood alone. It is about wisdom, love, and the ability to lead with a true heart. The people saw Obinna as their king, but they did not understand that he lacked the qualities needed to rule. He thought power was his birthright, and it corrupted him. He ruled out of selfishness, not for the good of the kingdom. Chijioke's anger began to fade. His eyes softened, and I could see him beginning to understand. The chiefs exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the change in the room. I then turned to them, my voice cold. You have seen the error of your ways. You have seen what happens when a kingdom is ruled by someone who is not fit to lead. Obinna is not fit to rule, and because of his cruelty, especially imprisoning his own mother, Nola the Queen Olama, he will now face the consequences of his actions. The chiefs nodded in agreement, but I knew the lesson had already been learned. It was not just a lesson for Chijioke, but for everyone in the kingdom. With a heavy heart, I turned to the guards and ordered, "Take Obinna to the dungeon, where he will stay for the atrocities he has committed. His punishment will be for his cruelty to the people, and most of all, for imprisoning his own mother, the one who gave him life. He will stay there for as long as I see fit." The room fell silent as Obinna was led away, his eyes filled with shame, but I did not let my emotions sway me. He had shown no mercy to the kingdom or his family. Now it was time for him to learn the consequences of his arrogance. Turning back to Chijioke, I spoke again, my voice heavy with truth. Though you were not born with the blood of an Ikenga in your veins, you carry the Ikenga heart. You bear the name, and that name will continue to rule long after I am gone. The people will come to understand that. They will know that an adopted child, a child who has been raised with love, is no less a part of this kingdom than a biological one. And so the people of the kingdom began to cheer as Chijioke was named the crown prince once more, this time with the full knowledge that he had earned it, not because of blood, but because of his heart. The lesson. And though Chijioke was next in line after me, though he didn't have the Ikenga blood flowing through his veins, he had the Ikenga heart. He bore the Ikenga name, and an Ikenga kept ruling the people. It's not always by blood, but the name also matters. That name, Ikenga, would continue to rule the people after me in the person of Chijioke and even after Chijioke in the person of his own son. This is a lesson that a legally adopted child is still fully your child, just as a biological child is.